Yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Rabbi Fishman. Thanks for all who are joining us. You know, with all the social distancing that we're doing right now, it's hard. It's hard for me that we're so far apart from one another. And all the more so here in Israel this evening as we commemorate Yom HaShoah. So tonight, I look forward with everybody here, all those who are joining us, together with a dear friend of mine, to delve into maybe the most difficult philosophical and theological question maybe ever posed. And that is, how can one remain faithful to God after the Holocaust? But we're not trying to reach the answer, and there isn't one answer. But through the discussion, I hope we can support one another. We can carry this tremendous burden together, and maybe we can even help God carry it a little bit as well. When I thought about who in the world I could share this question with, who I could really speak this question out with, so one name quickly popped into my head, and I'm honored to share the screen here with my dear friend, my chavruta, Rabbi Mark Fishman. We spent 5 years learning Torah together at 2 different institutions, and 3 of those years we studied every day halacha as we were doing our rabbinical studies. Those were very, very sweet times. Just a little bit about Rabbi Fishman before we hear from him. He is from London, England. Following his undergraduate studies in philosophy at Manchester University, he went on to pursue his passion for Jewish learning by studying in Jerusalem, Israel, where, as I mentioned, we overlapped. Rabbi Fishman completed his rabbinical studies under the leadership and training of Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Ritzkin in Efrat, Israel, where both Rabbi Fishman and I did our rabbinical studies together. And in 2010, he joined Congregation Beth Tikva Avat Shalom Nusach Ha'ari in Montreal, which is a thriving and diverse Jewish community, which I personally have had the pleasure to visit several times and to be there with Rabbi Fishman and his community. And he lives in Dollard in the suburbs of Montreal with his wife Sarah and their 4 beautiful children. One of them is right here. We actually started not only our journey in Jewish learning together, but our journey in parenthood together. Our first daughters were born about 2 weeks from one another. So we both are now celebrating the bat mitzvah of our oldest daughters, which is scary to think about. It means our wives are old, Rabbi Fishman. That's all that means.
I'm sorry, I'm multitasking between 18 different responsibilities right now. Under the table and outside of the camera shot are children swinging off chandeliers and table legs, and we're almost there.
Okay, great. So
the wonders of staying home. But
exactly.
I'm with you. You have my full concentration.
Beautiful.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and a pleasure to be with all of the students at Hebrew University and the very special Beit Midrash that you lead and that you run and that you are the director of, to be with the RRG Beit Midrash program at Hebrew University is an honor, and I am so happy to be here with you, Rabbi Udren.
It's awesome. It's great to see you. So I just have to share one of the many things I admire you for, and it's something that I would like to think that we share.
Juggling my children while on video conference.
Why do you think I'm wearing headphones? That's the trick. It's all quiet under the headphones. But that is a drive and a desire to connect to Jews from all different backgrounds and levels of observance. And that's one of the things that I love seeing in your community when I come to visit you guys, is to see how broad and diverse the community is, all the different types of Jews that you're able to bring together under that one tent. It's something that we try very hard to do. And our Beit Midrash community as well, it's something that really I pride myself on as well. And I'm sure the group that's taking part right now is also quite diverse. So with that in mind, let's just dive in. This is such an important and pressing question, especially where we are today. But before we delve into the theological components of it, I just would love for our group, to just hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your community, the work that you do there now, and you can even specifically discuss how things have shifted a little bit because of the coronavirus and how that's affected all of us.
Sure. So I am the rabbi of a modern Orthodox congregation here in Montreal, Canada. We are a beautiful, lovely, thriving congregation. And like everybody else in the world right now, we're on lockdown. We are hunkering down in our homes. And we are trying to do our part to follow social distancing practices and to engage in responsible behavior. In doing so, we'll be able to not overwhelm our healthcare system and hopefully stop the spread of the virus simultaneously. So that means that school is cancelled. That means all regular shops are cancelled or closed except for essential services. And I think it's pretty much the same in most areas of the world right now, especially first world countries, where governments are taking responsible behavior. We as a synagogue are experiencing a moment of challenge, and I'm looking at it as a moment of opportunity to see how can we pivot and be able to perform the fundamental role, which is connection and meaning in the lives of the families who are a part of our community. And now do that in a way that is where everybody is staying at home, where the doors of the synagogue are closed and shut. Are we defined by our bricks and mortar, or can we be a synagogue without walls? And I am a big believer that the messages of our tradition, the love and engagement and holistic approach that Judaism has in all facets of life can extend beyond one's physical presence. So we are trying as much as possible to change now many of our programs, our education opportunities, and our experiences to become part of an online platform. And actually, the opportunity here gives us a great chance to do things we never would have done before. This coming Thursday at 5 p.m., I'm taking all of my congregation to Masada for free. So through fantastic tour guides, one of the things that an incredible member of my community brought to my attention is that of the many people who are hurting economically, Israeli tour guides are really hurting, and that's a precarious career choice from a financial perspective in the best of times. And so we've reached out to some popular tour guides, some people who come very highly recommended. And for the next 7 weeks, we're going to be visiting 7 different places around Israel. And that's just something we haven't done before. We wouldn't have even considered, really. So these are some of the new exciting ideas as we change and see what opportunities are now out there if we think differently than the way we have before.
Beautiful, absolutely. I think a lot of those openings have affected our work as well, and it's been an opportunity to connect with some of our alumni that we haven't seen in many, many years. So I agree with that, making the best of the situation and going online. And the tools that we have are unbelievable. Just that we're doing this is fantastic. I mean, this is something new, so I'm very excited about it. The experience for me growing up in South Florida, surrounded by Jews, and having much of my Holocaust education, much of my Jewish education rather, focused on the Holocaust, it certainly left a certain imprint and perspective on the Holocaust. But considering you're from London, coming from Europe, I imagine that your relationship with the Holocaust education, looked pretty different and felt pretty different from the American or the Canadian experience. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that from you.
So actually, you bring up an interesting topic. I am third generation and fourth generation British from the respective parts of my grandparents' families. And as such, I grew up in a very acculturated, very naturalized English family and home where we felt very British and we identified very, very much with Britain. And 3 out of my 4 grandparents were born in Britain. So through my Jewish schooling and education, the Holocaust and my Zionist youth group as well, that had a major impact on my life. My education was framed with the Holocaust as part of the curriculum. However, it was only upon arriving in Montreal, meeting my wife and then coming to Montreal, that the Holocaust took on a very different sense. First of all, my wife's late father was a survivor himself. He was born in Poland prior to the war breaking out. He grew up in Warsaw and was actually in the Warsaw Ghetto. And amazingly, that brought immediacy of the Holocaust reality to me in a way that had always been something I had learnt about, something I had studied over, something I had looked towards. And now it was literally a part of my family. And in Montreal in particular, I believe outside of Israel, it was the second or third largest population of Holocaust survivors to then settle after they had started to find a new home and a new life for themselves once again. So it wasn't until I came to Montreal that I actually met and had very close connections with survivors in a very first-hand way. I was also very quickly thrust into the world of the March of the Living, which is unfortunately cancelled this year. And as such, I was able to visit on 4 or 5 different occasions, on 4 or 5 different years, the sites of the atrocities, as well as to take a first-hand look at what was Jewish life prior to the war. The emphasis being on the word "was," of course. In some communities, Städtlach and cities today in Poland, there's no Jews left. Although that is changing, and that is its own fascinating sociological study, but that's a subject for another time, I think.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I'm also a third generation American, and the Holocaust was something very, very distant. Again, it was a central component of my Reformed Jewish education, so much so that it's hard for me to really pinpoint other topics of discussion outside of the Holocaust from my Jewish education, but it was always something very distant. And again, especially growing up in South Florida, where so many Jews, I mean, it's such a large Jewish community, no issues of anti-Semitism, no sense of that, everything was kind of a history book. But also through my wife, whose family is from Montreal, not so far from where you are right now, and especially my wife's late grandmother, Sally Rendell, and her husband as well, who I didn't have as much opportunity to interact with, but specifically with her grandmother, who passed away about a year or so ago now. I did have a chance to spend some time with and hear her stories of the old world and hear her stories from the camp where she was and what that world was like. And that taste really did open me up to the reality of it in a way that, Viktor Frankl never was able to. And so that's a very important and powerful point about the importance of survivors and hearing their stories firsthand and the impact that can have. Definitely, I appreciate that. Montreal, I found in visiting there, is a place where there was a lot of survivors, I found, especially in the Côte Saint-Luc area. Are there a lot of survivors in your particular community out in Dollard? Children of survivors, is that something that is
absolutely
present? Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a slightly younger community than the Côte Saint-Luc community. It is an older community, Côte Saint-Luc, and as a result, a lot of the survivors live there. But we certainly have second generation and third generation individuals living here in our community here in Montreal.
So it's a topic. It's something that comes up. It's very present there.
To the degree that it comes up is an interesting point. Sometimes it's just lived with in the background. And it's not spoken of directly, but rather it is something which can color everything else. to varying degrees, depending upon to what sense it is so apparent and powerful.
Very interesting. Speaking of coloring, I'm very much looking forward to the sources that you're going to share to put some color into this darkness for us, to kind of share some perspectives into how we start to even deal with these questions, how we start to digest these type of issues. And so I'm going to sit back and turn the screen over to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what it is you have to share with us.
Okay, thank you. I think when a person approaches coming to talking about theology and the Holocaust, it is with the utmost sensitivity and caution that a person needs to realize just the very context in where they're treading. This is not something I speak of firsthand. This is not something I speak of as somebody who was a survivor who lived through these times, but rather something that I'm approaching from the perspective of someone who is studying texts and reading such sources about. And as a result of that, there has to be a great humility and sensitivity and care when wading into these subjects. For those who lost loved ones, for those who lost family members, for those who lost entire villages of communities, sometimes the only response is, following last week's Torah reading of V'yedom Aharon, there is a silence that is there, and nothing else other than that silence can ever be touched upon. So that's really my starting point. Beyond that, what can be said? I think what's so interesting is how the theological compass of trying to understand God's role in the Holocaust, or an understanding of theology at all when it comes to the problem of evil, specifically with the issue of the Holocaust, is something that spins in all directions. I don't know if you ever did that science experiment where you were to place iron filings near a magnet when you were in school as a little kid. And then for some reason, this is true when mountaineers get close to the North Pole or the South Pole, the compass spins in every direction. So that analogy is, I believe, how we can view Jewish theology post the Holocaust. The theological compass spun in every direction. What do I mean by that? You can find almost every single polar opposite approach and opinion that can be put forward as a theological statement for why the Holocaust happened. So if we take a look at the books of the Satmar Rebbe, Yoel Teitelbaum, he will write in his books that the Holocaust actually took place as a direct result of the assimilation of German Jewry, and specifically the Zionist move to try to break the rules of a 2,000-year-old diaspora, reclaiming a return back to a modern state of Israel in secular terms. And this is a very bold claim that is made. It is a very powerful one. It is one that in the early days of the state of Israel was one that carried much weight among many of the Hasidic world. And the Holocaust as a punishment for Zionism. And yet what's amazing is that we actually find in the writings of various Zionist schools that actually just the opposite is true. The Holocaust was actually a punishment for those who chose not to support Zionism. Because here we have, for the first time since we have been thrown out of our land, an opportunity and express permission given to us by the Gentile world to return back through the Balfour Declaration, through the United Nations Partition Plan of 47, through the approval and permission of the nations, a return back to our homeland, to reject that permission. The Holocaust was a punishment for rejecting the land of Israel. So what you have here, fascinatingly, is a polar opposite approach within religious views, anti-Zionist and pro-Zionist, both using the event of the Holocaust as a proof to bolster their very claim. A third approach sees the Holocaust as a rejection of both of these ideas, and rather it is God hiding his face from history and hiding his face from the Jewish people. And we are simply left open to the vagaries of chance and humanity when there is a Hester Panim. And yet, to take that line of thinking of God's centrality in Jewish history to the degree that when he hides his face, we are destroyed, the opposite approach was given to the interpretation of the Holocaust, that you see that there is no God in history if his chosen people can be destroyed. And so the very theology of a Hester Panim, the hiding of God's face, is itself refuted by the claim that there is no God because of the Holocaust. These are four religious models that all point to knowing exactly how to understand the Holocaust through Jewish theology, and each of them promoting their own deeper agenda and mission. I will add that outside of a religious theological perspective, we also have, for some Israeli social thinkers, the Holocaust being a refutation of the diaspora existence, and the Holocaust as the great argument of the imperative of living in the land of Israel. This is not necessarily a theological religious response, but it's a sociological one given by many Israeli thinkers. And yet there are certain diaspora intellectuals who will argue, again, in the exact opposite direction, against the geographical concentration of Jews in one specific location, and hence the Holocaust demonstrates the necessity for dispersion. A third tier in these mutually exclusive approaches has, for some, the final solution proving the impossibility of escaping from Jewish identity, that even the most secular, even the most ardent French of the French, the most German of the Germans, faced the gas chambers, and there was no way out of the final solution. One cannot escape one's Jewish identity. For others, it proves just the opposite, the urgency of escaping from one's Jewish identity, the imperative of assimilation, so that there can no longer be a sense of Jewish identity whatsoever. So if you put all of these ideas into, again, I'm framing this in the analogy of a compass that is at the North Pole, we have a theological, religious, sociological, and cultural compass spilling wildly out of control, pointing in each and every direction available, using the Holocaust to verify precisely what it is that is the agenda of those who are putting forward such an approach. Where does that leave us? How is a person supposed to find their way out of this mess? How can we find direction when our compass points everywhere? I think, first of all, to explain that lack of direction, I would like to suggest that the reason we have so many competing claims is because the Jewish world has not yet learnt how to integrate the Holocaust into the collective Jewish consciousness of our people. I'm sure just like me, you were sitting at a Passover Seder not too long ago, eating a Hillel sandwich. If ever there was a misnomer, the Hillel sandwich. It's not like any sandwich I know. But we were eating a Hillel sandwich. We break a glass at weddings. We speak of Elijah the prophet at a Brit Milah. Some have a custom of leaving a portion of their house empty, unplastered, unbuilt. We sing Im Eshkehech Yerushalayim Tishkach Yemini. At the height of our joy, if I should forget thee, O Jerusalem, may I forget my right hand. We as a people took the greatest catastrophe of our people, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the exile from our land, and we embedded that into a living national identity that is a part of our consciousness today. And we haven't yet, and completely understandably, and we are still in living memory, we're still in the presence, thank goodness for the survivors who continue to live amongst us. We continue in such a short period of time to not yet integrate fully that historical reality into our everyday consciousness. And for all of the while that we yet are there, that is why our theological religious compass will spin in every direction. North America decided it would be through museums, and in more recent generations, the March of the Living. Israel decided a very different narrative. We recall in the early days of the state, the Holocaust, and especially the survivors were looked upon as a nebuch, as we, the new Jew, the strong Jew, the Jew who can defend themselves in our new land, look down at you as sheep to the slaughter. It was a very difficult grappling with historical consciousness of the Holocaust in the early days of the state of Israel. So that, I believe, is the cause and the reason for our theological compass spinning in so many different directions. So what can we say? What are we left with? How are we able to find a way out? And I think that what is a compelling approach to me is not to reject God, is not to ask, where was God at Auschwitz? I believe God was at Auschwitz, and he was at Auschwitz in the command, you shall not murder. And I believe God was at Auschwitz in the line from the Bible that says, Al ta'amod al dam ra'echa, you shall not stand idly by as your brother's blood is being shed. I believe God was at Auschwitz. We lost our collective humanity in the fires of the gas chambers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we lost the presence of God as well. Now, I'm not saying this in a cavalier fashion, and I'm not saying this in a happy-go-lucky and therefore everything is okay. I believe sometimes one of the greatest challenges to our faith, perhaps the greatest challenge to faith in general, are those 8 words from the book of Psalms, chapter 23. Gam ki elech begei salmavet, lo irara, ki ata imadi. Although I will walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Judaism is a faith that allows us to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And while it does, we can do so yet in the presence of God, a God who we might not understand, a God who we might not have in our pockets, a God who doesn't simply do our bidding each time we ask him to, and a God who perhaps we require a revision of our own understanding, but yet a God who we can walk with nevertheless.
Wow. Rabbi Fishman, beautiful, beautiful and eloquent, and a wonderful chidush about the polar opposites and the image of the compass. That will definitely stay with me. I wondered as well, just taking off of that beautiful image of the compass pointing in all directions, is that something that you personally, when you grapple with these issues, is that something that you experience as well? A kind of a sense of theological, being pointed in all different directions?
I think all of us, to the degree that we are challenged by these questions, will feel pulled in many different directions. I recall the very beginning of Tractate Brachot on page 5a, that in the language of the sages of the Talmud, Moshe Rabbeinu, after being with God for 40 days and 40 nights on the top of Mount Sinai, is given the chance to ask God any question he wishes, and he asks him our question. He asks him, why do the righteous suffer? To which God says, I cannot give you an answer to that question. You can't answer that question from the perspective of your finite little world. And if Moses, the greatest of all prophets, wasn't able to understand God's ways, I don't think any of us can. And as we grapple, I'm sure sometimes we will feel more compelled in one direction and at other times in a different one. And it's the great truism that the prism through which we see our lives is how we are able to then see our projection of God.
So you also spoke about this inability, or at least at this stage in history, our inability as a people to have integrated the message or the story into some sort of concrete action, concrete tekes, talking about the difference in the way that different countries, different Jewish communities in the diaspora deal with this. Israel has been very good since the beginning of the state of creating all these tekesim, all these different ceremonies. If you're looking to recreate, as you said, this concept of the new Jew, so they almost have to create all these different ceremonies. And anyone who spent any time in Israel knows that around all of these commemoration days, especially this time of year in Iyar, it's one after the other. We have Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut coming up next week. I mean, it's a bit of emotional whiplash from Yom HaShoah to Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut, and especially this year, it's a great feeling of lacking, I think, in the general Israeli public, because we don't have these ceremonies, and that's such a fundamental, almost codish kind of thing that the secular Israeli or the non-religious, Israeli government community has set up here. Do you see kind of a unified, and also amidst that, there's obviously, as you were saying, there's polar opposite positions where you have some groups putting, these tekesim as kodesh kodeshim, and other religious groups turning their nose up at them, and somewhere in between. Do you have any, and maybe it's not a specific or concrete idea, but a kind of direction to point the Jewish communities, the different Jewish communities towards, in a way that we as a people, despite how spread out we are, that we can kind of coalesce and come together and find some way to integrate this into our consciousness in a way that's healthy, that's productive, that allows us to come together and share an experience together, like you said beautifully about Seder night. By the way, that's 4,000 years ago. I mean, we have had a good many years to kind of digest that and deal with that. And we don't have anything, let's say, for the Spanish Inquisition.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. Anyway, just a direction or an idea around that.
I think what the State of Israel does is certainly the guiding rule for how all communities should observe these days. We have a Tisha B'Av in our collective consciousness, the 9th of Av, the day when we sit on the floor and we read a scroll of the destruction and we cry tears of pain and we realize what we have lost. I think the creation of such events, programmings, commemorations are certainly the way in which we need to have this sense of a collective understanding. Perhaps it could be led by a national effort, whether that be at the State of Israel, whether that be in centers throughout the diaspora. And then each individual community in JCCs and synagogues in their own particular communities can come together in a night that should really draw out every single person in the community. First, listening to the survivors while we still have them in our midst. And then as the years and the generations continue, to be able to continue to mark this. I think that would be one type of direction for how we can understand this and better put it into our collective sense of commemoration.
So then we're already going in a good direction, it sounds like, according to what you're saying, as far as these type of ceremonies, and especially, as both of us pointed out, the importance of hearing from survivors while they're still here. I definitely appreciate that. Just to add a piece, this is something I've been thinking about and reading articles. Just today, I saw several pop up. The fact that we're sitting in quarantine, we're social distancing, we're overall removed from one another because of the coronavirus. As you mentioned, the synagogues in Canada are closed here in Israel as well for the most part. Is what we're going through now, does that change your perspective on how we view the Holocaust at all? I certainly want to hold a space for the sensitivity that you mentioned very beautifully at the beginning of your introduction, but I think it's an interesting question to bring up nonetheless.
Yeah, so not really. One of the memes that were going around on social media at the beginning of this pandemic were our grandparents fought a war, we're being asked to sit on the couch. You've got this. And
watch Netflix.
And I think there's something to that. I don't believe the social isolation aspect reframes my understanding of the Holocaust. I can tell you, however, that for those who are survivors, there is something that does touch on a raw nerve when there are long lines outside of supermarkets that buy food. And the ideas that we, especially second or third generation, take for granted, let's just take food scarcity. There is a multi-year PTSD impact that is made and imprinted into the very depths of the souls of the survivors. That the thought and the concept and the idea of not having enough food in one's fridge is taken in a very real way. So while I perhaps too quickly dismissed your question at the beginning, I think that for some, this certainly does have an impact that touches on great sensitivities. And in the flip side, I have heard people say, I'm healthy and I have a fridge and freezer full of food, I can't complain.
Hmm.
And it's almost as if there is that appreciation and understanding for what does it mean to not go without? What does it mean to be fully stocked up with food? We come back almost to a Maslow's hierarchy of quality of life, where I've got shelter, I've got food, I'm healthy, I actually have everything that I require right now. I will be able to see this out. So I think the pandemic does touch, to the degree that a person is psychologically sensitive and exquisitely set off by such nuances, I think it can certainly bring out those post-traumatic trauma moments in their lives.
I want to kind of re-articulate the question maybe, and also share just a little bit about just the initial thoughts that came up in my head around, these couple of articles that I saw. On one hand, to try to compare what it is that we're going through right now to the Holocaust, to, in other words, an apples to apples type of comparison. Going through the Holocaust would be like me sitting on my couch watching Netflix. My sense is that is an unfair and inappropriate and hurtful and damaging type of comparison. And I would agree that that's not the direction that we should go. And I have to say, I feel like I've lived a very privileged life. I never waited in a long line for eggs before. In Israel, we spoke about this, there's an egg shortage. Yeah. The most dangerous experience that I've gone through, at least in recent memory, has been trying to get eggs before Pesach. There's a sense of fear and anxiety around that experience that I don't remember feeling. My wife is in a high-risk category, so I'm the one going out and, feel like I'm, strapping up, putting my mask on, my gloves on, I'm going out, and I go out there and I get all the things that we need. I'm scared. It's a difficult time. When I go to and see people pushing and kind of grappling for a place in line to make sure they get eggs for Pesach, it's a sense of fear and that I haven't experienced. We all have our personal fears and our personal challenges, but this is something as a world that we're experiencing, and to me, this is something new in a way that I never understood it before. And there's a certain sense that I heard this from a friend of mine, that we're almost living outside of time at this point. That, and a conversation with my wife clarified this. She said, what day is today? I was like, Tuesday, Wednesday? Let me check. It's either Shabbos or Chol. That's how it feels. It's either a weekday or it's a holiday. Those are the two modalities right now. And it's a different world. It's a very, very different world. So would I compare that to the experience of a Holocaust survivor? God forbid, no, never. And this experience, I think, does open me up, though, to an appreciation and understanding of what it is to live in a world that is outside of time and hard to believe. I don't know about you, but there's some mornings I wake up, I almost want to pinch myself and just, is this over yet? Like, are we past it yet? Mm-hmm. But it's not clear how all of this is going to unfold, where we're going to end this story, how it's going to dissipate. Is it going to, end in another 2 weeks, another 2 months? How many, and especially there have been several students who have reached out to me whose parents have been in the hospital, especially students from New York, the center of all of this, unfortunately, in the world right now. A student from New York reached out, my mother's in the hospital suffering, please pray for her. My uncle died, my father's best friend died. I heard from a student just yesterday. There is a tremendous sense of loss right now. And though it's not evil as created by humanity, so to speak, it's evil in another sense. I guess what I'm trying to get to is that there is an opening, a sense of otherness, of life lived differently, that I'm experiencing now that opens me up to something that wasn't available before.
Yeah, I really think that you're touching on something very important. This, without a doubt, is a once in a lifetime, we hope, without having a crystal ball, a once in a lifetime reality for us. We who have never lived through a worldwide pandemic before are experiencing ours now, so to speak. And what that does is it just shakes the ground from underneath you. And when you are faced with a complete and total disruption of life, it forces you to be reflective, or it gives you the opportunity. I don't believe everyone takes it, but it gives some the opportunity to be reflective. And I'm reminded of the Rambam's words, Maimonides in Hilchot Ta'anit, who speaks along the lines of how should a person respond when a tragedy befalls their community. And he, as only Maimonides can do, he walks in between the raindrops, and he says, the first thing a person should realize is that no one can pinpoint why it's happening. No one should say or be able to claim, I know the mind of God and he's punishing us for the following. And then he goes on to say, however, if a person would just turn around and say, it's pure chance, everything that is happening can be explained because of randomness. We know that bats carry disease. We know that it's incredibly rare, but there is such a concept in biology as genetic mutation. And what's even rarer statistically is that there should be a genetic mutation that leaps species. Statistically, who could even pinpoint the likelihood of it? But if there would be a disease carried in bats that could be genetically mutated, that then can jump species, okay, so we're living in a time of a pandemic, and it's random. God created a world of biology, and accept that the things that take place and happen are pure chance. So that, he says, would be cruel. And it's a fascinating use of his language. Achzarut, cruelty. You would say like theologically mistaken, or you might, he might go on to say such a person is, religiously making an error. But he says it's cruel. He uses a very moral category. And I think the reason he does so is in the very next words that he uses is because it's never to be seen as random happenstance. Rather, a person should say, where might we have lost our way? And without being able to pinpoint the cause and the reason, how can we view our deeds? How can we view our actions? How can we view the state of life that we live in and the assumptions that we take for granted? And question those once again and ask ourselves, what really are we taking for granted that maybe we shouldn't have been all along?
Very beautiful.
I'll throw out just some, observations, but I'm not really qualified to be a social commentator. But to look at a world of consumerism, to look at a world where we believe purchasing items creates happiness. Take a step back to look at a world where the pursuit of happiness is itself a value. That itself is fascinating, enshrined in the American famous Constitution. Pursuit. You grew up in Florida. Remind me, the pursuit of happiness, wealth, honor. What is it?
Don't remember exactly. Happiness.
These are inalienable rights. And when we look at the concept of how our technology, while right now, there you go, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
There we go.
But when we look at the role of how technology has atomized us all away from one another, the complete and total breakdown of the family, the complete and total breakdown of society, the breakdown of community. You know, Martin Buber once spoke about an I-thou relationship. Today, nobody would understand what you are talking about unless that sentence finished in iPod, iPhone, iPad. We become so lonely, and we've all become lonely. In Jerry Turkle's beautiful phrase that she named her book with, we've become alone together. So these are some of the ills of society that we're all guilty of, at least in the West, perhaps across the globe. And maybe, as we take Maimonides' words seriously, we can start to question, who are we? Is the path that we are walking down the right one? And how perhaps could we go about changing some of our assumptions about what really matters? There was a question that came in on the chat. Could you please comment about how we are stuck in our homes and how this relates to Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron next week in terms of not being able to visit memorials or graves or even to stand outside during the siren? I think this goes to the heart of this point. We take so much for granted, and so many things are just assumed. Of course, this is the way it is. This is the way it has to be. This is the way it should be. And suddenly we realize, well, what's truly important? Can I visit a grave? Can I participate in a memorial ceremony? And now that I can't, where does that leave me? Well, the first thing I would like to say is, this will pass. Gam ze ya'avor. And from just the history of pandemics, they come and they go. And a person shouldn't feel despair. There is never a place for despair in our lives. It's a hardship and it's a struggle. And economically, people are terribly suffering. But we shouldn't despair. We will yet again face a brighter day. And in doing that, we'll realize, and we have the opportunity to realize, what are some of the things that we took for granted? A stroll outdoors, the ability to visit a grave, the sense of meaning I got from a national memorial, where perhaps previously I was, I'm not going to go this year. It's not so important. I've got something else. There are moments of national solidarity. And on a personal level, there are moments of familial solidarity. What do we do with our kids? What is the time that we spend with our children? What is the quality of our marriages and our relationships, and how do we carve out time for those we love? What do we take for granted? And who are we treating as if we take them for granted? So these are opportunities that we will all be able to respond to as far as how we can change some of the patterns of our lives.
You're reminding me of a piece in Rabbi Nachman that I just came across recently that's been giving me a lot of strength. And he says that in every matter, God is screaming out to us. Screaming, so echalim. And I think it's very difficult for us to hear God screaming at us sometimes. I love the image of screaming and not just speaking, because as if to imagine God standing there, you're go that way, the other way. Whatever happens in our life, and one of the, I don't know if lessons is the right word, but one of the talking points, or one of the important points about speaking, when we speak about the Holocaust as well. Either God is present even in the Holocaust, or there's no God at all. No God at all. It's all or nothing. Either there's hashgacha, there's divine providence, there's God in the world, or there isn't. So Rabbi Nachman says God is screaming to you in each and every moment, and he says, sometimes you're going to feel that when you pray. You'll feel so close that you'll feel like God is davening through you, that there's an incredible unity, and that one is just davening God's prayers, so to speak, and there's just an incredible alignment. And there are other times when one feels a sense that, and he quotes the Zohar, that one has to be accurate in their shooting of arrows. One has to know how to shoot arrows. What does the Zohar mean when it has to shoot arrows? You have to understand that when God feels far away, we have to be able to shoot our tefillot like an archer shoots at a target from far away. And I don't know if you and your community have been able to experience it, but here in Beit El, I know other communities across Israel, we've been having minyanim in the mirpasot, in our back patios. By keeping to the standards of the health officials, maintaining distance, I sit on my balcony. My neighbor below is on his balcony. Across, there's 3 and another 3. And between our whole row of apartments, we're able to put together a minyan, but we're so far from one another. It's hard to hear. And this image of shooting arrows at a faraway target feels very, very appropriate right now. And it reminds me of the words that I get tremendous chizuk from the Eish Kodesh, the Piazetzner Rabbi, an incredible work that was written by Rabbi Kalonimus Kalman Shapira in the Warsaw Ghetto, was hidden when he realized that the ghetto was being liquidated. He was the spiritual figurehead in the ghetto. I mean, what a incredible task to put on a person. And nevertheless, he says, it's easy to serve God when things are going well, when Parnassah is good, when the kids are great, when the grades are good, when everything's good, it's very easy. But when, God forbid, someone experiences suffering, that is an opportunity to serve God with a broken heart. And even amidst tremendous struggle that we can never imagine, one has to find a way to, what he calls, to be able to sit in the chamber of the divine and weep with God, so to speak. To open our hearts and cry God's tears. The reality that we look at now, especially in the places where the coronavirus is hitting very, very hard, the Hester Panim is very, very thick. And who can even imagine what it was in Auschwitz or Treblinka? But if somehow we're able to cry God's tears, we can sit with God, so to speak, in the inner chamber and cry with God and find some way to connect with him and serve even in the most difficult of times. And again, not, God forbid, to make a one-to-one comparison, but for those who are struggling right now, to find a way, a blessing that I have for myself and for all of us, is to be able to find a way to bring God into this and not push God out of this. And if we could understand and could see through the layers and the veils, to be able to really cry those tears. Anyway, I want to thank you, Rabbi Fishman, for all of your incredible insights, for opening your mind and your heart in your home to me and to all of us here. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. I thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope we'll get to do it again.
It's an honor to be with you and the students at the Hebrew University for the Beit Midrash program. Once again, at the RRG Beit Midrash out of the Hebrew University. I wish you success and good luck with all of your programming and everything that you're doing with the students. And in these difficult times of these days, not only of seclusion, but Yom HaShoah that Israel now has already commenced and that we begin in a few hours, and Yom HaZikaron followed by Yom HaAtzmaut, we are reminded just about what it means to be part of a greater narrative, to be part of a people that have seen the worst of times, and also to be able to overcome. Again, in the book of Psalms, Lo amut ki ehyeh, I will not die, rather I will live. Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish nation lives, and we will know that we will come out of this healthy, please God, stronger, please God.
Amen.
And
For all of
the
us.
world will come out of this with an opportunity for new patterns and new directions. I'd like to give an incredible thank you to all of the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, the professional healthcare staff throughout the world, wherever they may be, not just in Montreal and Israel, but throughout the world, who are literally on the front lines of this, and to everybody who needs the refuah shalema, may they be blessed with good health. And truly, may we yet live to see better days.
Amen. Thank you, Mark. Continued success in all of your work in your community. They are blessed to have you there. And I thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening, for being a part of this discussion tonight, for joining us as we support one another through these challenges.
Thank you.
Rabbi Fishman, Yashar Koach. Have a good night.
Care.
Thank you.
Laila Tov. Laila Tov.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.